And today we'll be talking about SwiftUI architecture. Here is a little bit about myself. My name is Mohammad Azam. I go by Azam. I'm an iOS developer, coding bootcamp instructor, and I also run my own website, azamsharp.school. Author, speaker, and now this talk is going to be interesting because I'll be telling you a lot of things that you already have been doing in SwiftUI architecture that may not be correct. So I'm going to tell you my own story, and maybe you can learn some patterns and practices from there. It's kind of hard to stand over here with the light. All right. So it all started with WWDC 2019, and when Apple introduced SwiftUI. Now, I was really happy at that point because, hey, I already know React and I already know Flutter. So SwiftUI was kind of like a walk in the park for me. But then I started thinking about, okay, which pattern should I use? I mean, in UIKit applications, we were using MVC model view controller. So what should I use with SwiftUI? And I didn't really thought about it that much at that time. I'm like, okay, I'll just use what other people are using. So I'll just use MVVM or whatever. And after that, I went a little bit crazy, started writing books about MVVM, publishing articles, creating videos. I was guest in different podcasts and more articles and more videos and more articles and more videos. And yeah, I tend to do that. And a lot of stuff, a lot of content related to MVVM. Most of my applications were client, server, or core data or Swift data application. I think most of you are also developing the same applications. And they will consist of, here's a simple view. There's different screens over here, 4 or 5 screens. And I say screens and I don't say views because screen over here is more of a bigger container that can contain other reusable views. But anyway, for each screen, I will have a separate view model. I mean, that's how we're supposed to use MVVM, right? And each view model will have a dependency on HTTP client because they need to get the stuff from server or they need to post to the server. So for 5 or 6 different screens, I added 5 or 6 different view models. Pretty normal. I mean, if you go read any article or watch any videos, this is exactly what you're going to get. Each of the screen will have a dependency on the view model. Each of the view model will have a dependency on HTTP client. And then this goes on and on and on. All right? One thing I started to notice is if I'm using this approach, if I'm creating for every single screen, I'm creating every single view model, a separate view model, I can have like 50 screens and I can have 50 view models. And in none of those view models, I can access things like app storage. I cannot access environment object easily, focus state, fetch request, environment itself, query. I mean, they're all available only inside the view itself. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong. I can't access any of these things inside my observable objects, inside my view models. And sometimes I have views that are deeper down into the hierarchy. How do I pass data to them? Well, I can actually use environment object, but wait, environment object is only available inside the view. I should probably not use that because that's what the iOS community was telling everyone. And then I come across these Stack Overflow posts like, hey, how do I pass environment object into the view model? It says 116 upvotes, 116 likes. Well, you can do that by using dependency injection. But to be really honest, it looks horrible. I mean, by the time I was done passing the environment object in a view model, I don't even know what I was doing. Who was the source of truth? What was going on? Things were not really different for core data and Swift data applications. I mean, in a very simple application where you have one screen that is showing you a list of movies and another sheet or a modal that is showing you the add movie screen, how do I add a movie from the add movie screen and refresh it on the movie list screen? How do I do that? Well, I can reload everything on the dismiss. I mean, dismiss of the view, dismiss of the modal or the sheet. I can definitely do that. I can, if I'm feeling crazy, I can go ahead and implement for core data ns fetch results controller. Now, that's a lot of code. There is no way I can do that. I mean, it works, and it automatically refreshes your screen with all the movies when you add a new movie. But no, I don't want to do that. This is a lot of code. I don't have time for this BS. Or if you're feeling completely crazy, then you can pass flags to refresh the parent. So from the add screen, you can, or add task view, you can pass some flags. And I have seen these approaches. Well, I've done these approaches. Hey, let's just change the accent color to clear, and then it will refresh, right? We have all done those things. I can also use closures. This is a good technique. This is a fine technique. So there's nothing wrong with this technique. It's OK. But what about just using fetch requests? Property wrapper. What about using query macro for Swift data? What about that? Can I just use that? Oh, no, the iOS community, no. You cannot use that. Cannot. They're only available inside the view. You can't do that. So this is when I used to have hair. But this is me now thinking, OK, what just went wrong? And I'm like, OK, you know what? Forget about it. 2019, SwiftUI was introduced. 2013, React was introduced. React and SwiftUI are very similar. Why don't I just go and learn from React? I already know React and Flutter. So I looked at React, how React was doing things. And what React does is they use a container presenter model. So you have a component, a container component. Inside that, you have presentation components. The job of the container component is to do all the other stuff, like fetching the stuff and then posting it and all that stuff. Presentation components are used for reusability and display purposes. So here's a very simple example of React. Now, I know that maybe you don't know React, but I can bet all of you $100,000 that you can still understand what this is, right? What does component feels like? A view, right? So component in React is kind of like a view. And you can see the dog images container is loading fetch request to this long URL. And then right down at the bottom, dog images is just passing the data. OK, wow, this is actually pretty nice. It's so simple in React. How can I do that in SwiftUI? So I started experimenting. All those view models, get them out of here. Let's just remove all those view models. I'm just experimenting. Don't go crazy, all right? How about the view itself just talk to the HTTP client? Can we do that? All right? Now, I know people are like, what about separation of concerns? Forget about that right now, all right? The separation of concerns is the view, the container itself. If you don't understand that, then go and watch the documentary from React people, the people who actually created React. The separation of concern is still there. The concerns are just moved into the component itself. But that's just one way of doing things. This is not the only way. OK, so you can see on the top, I get the HTTP client from the environment because I just want to make it look fancy. I mean, you can just pass it. That's also fine. And then I load it right there, load articles. I just call the function. And the load articles just use the HTTP client directly and get the stuff and populate it into articles, which is a private state. Wow, so nice, so simple. I can do that. This is the container presenter pattern that React has been using since 2013. So anyone who's thinking you can't really make apps on that, go and look at React. It has been around since 2013. They are using these patterns to create scalable enterprise-level applications, all right? Because I think the first thing we always say, oh, it's not going to work in a big app. Well, they have been doing that for big app. It's been released since 2013. React has 6-year advantage on SwiftUI. Now, sometimes you want to reuse the sorting behavior. Now, yeah, you can create extensions and all that stuff. But I've already created the environment for the value. On the top, you can see sort function, and I can just use a sort function. It's kind of like a hook in React, but in SwiftUI, it's more of an environment value. How do I pass the data? Well, you can use closure in this case. I mean, that's perfectly fine. Just pass the closure to the add user screen. When the user adds the screen, then you add it right there on the left side, on the top. You can just add it to the stuff, to the array. So I was using this pattern, and it was working perfectly fine. But then comes, well, how do I share data with different screens that are, that are deep into the hierarchy, or they are deep in the navigation stack? Well, how do I do it in React? We use Redux in React. Anybody has used Redux? Yeah, so a lot of people. All right. Redux is basically the global state in React. Redux is already built in SwiftUI. It's called environment object. You don't have to do any fancy stuff with the reducers and all that middleware and all that stuff. It's already there. It's just called environment object. Now, in order to use environment object, we have to use observable or observable object. So we come to this diagram, and I'm like, OK, so if I want to use Redux, if I want to use some sort of a global object, maybe I can just put something in the middle, and I can call it store or aggregate model or something. And Apple actually discussed this particular technique in WWDC 2020, Data Essentials in SwiftUI. You can see this orange rectangle or the rounded rectangle. That's the surface area, meaning all your views, those blue things, are going to talk to that surface area and get access to all of these entities. And you can look at several different examples that Apple have also put out. Those examples are like Fruta app and the Food Truck app and the Backyard Birds app. All of those things are actually there for you to check it out. Now, granted, they are not like enterprise level millions of lines of code, but you can still learn from those. Actually, I would say Food Truck is a pretty decent size app. I would say it's like a medium size app. Here's a direct screenshot from Apple. Use Xcode for server-side development. That's the name of the WWDC session. And you can see that what Apple is doing is they're creating a food truck model. You can call it food truck store. That's fine. And in there, they're using the donut server client to get all the donuts from a HTTP request. Now, in a small application, you probably may need only one observable object if you only have one source of truth. But in larger applications, you can add more. Here's the code from my own application, Hello Market, where I'm using product store. And all the things that are responsible for products, like saving the product, loading all the product, loading my products, updating products, everything is in that single product store. I can call it product view model or whatever, it doesn't matter. I just call it product store. And the good thing about this product store is that now I can go ahead and inject it. I can create a product store, and I can inject it as an environment so it's available to everyone. And now everyone can just use it from the environment object. The same goes for the add product screen, because it's adding the product. We can just use it directly. We just get the product store, and we start using it wherever we want. Now, at this particular point, people usually say, well, hold on a second. Isn't product store just a view model? Well, the answer is no. The product store is not the view model. If we go back to the diagram, you see in the view model approach, when we were creating view model for every single screen. Do you really think about this? Do you really think your every single screen has a different source of truth? No, you don't. Then why creating 3 different observable objects? We don't have a reason, right? Because we were just following, somebody said something and we just start following it. Here's what it will look like when you actually use a single source of truth, movie store. Now, this is only for the movies. It's not like, well, I'm just going to put all my code in movies. No, not all the code, only for the movies. adding the movies, deleting the movies, updating the movies, movie details, listing movies, sorting movies, filtering movies, movie store. Or you can say movie view model, whatever you want to say. For products, it's going to be product store. All right? So in this example, where you have the view models, removing all the view models over here, and then replacing it with some sort of a product store, as you can see. There we go, or movie store. But wait, if that contains all the business logic, the movie store, what's in the view? So this is example from the food truck application, and this is the actual view. It's called orders view. And you can see what's in the view itself. Orders, ordered section. So in the view, you have the code for transformation logic, validation logic, mapping logic, and these kind of things. So at that point, it hit me like a brick on the back of my head that the view itself is the view model in SwiftUI. All right? And that was the turning point, that when I was like, okay, hold on a second, now I get it. View is like a component in React. View is the view model. I don't have to start creating a separate view model for every single screen. And that is how Apple is doing it. That is the way to do it to make your life much simpler. So you can see that how we have reduced the code. All of these things are about movies. Instead of creating 5 different sources of truth, we created one single source of truth for that particular bounded context, for that thing, movies. But what about bigger apps? I mean, that's definitely not going to work for bigger apps, right? Well, for bigger apps, you can create multiple sources of truth, but it should not be based on the number of screens that you're adding. I mean, just think about it. If you're working in an e-commerce app, you may have 50, 60, 100 screens. Do you really think you will have 100 view models? Would it be easier to manage few sources of truth rather than 100? So whenever we are working on these applications, like larger e-commerce applications, we can create sources of truth based on the context, catalog, fulfillment, other things. Again, the same diagram. All the movie screens are talking to the movie store. All the product screens are talking to the product store. And this is what it kind of looks like in a large context. You can see on the top, you have catalog UI. These can be simply folders. So catalog UI will contain all the screens for the catalog. And catalog itself will be catalog model or catalog store, catalog view model, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't really use the term view model because the view model, if you go back in 2004, it was known as presentation model by Martin Fowler. You can read about it. And view model was, or MVVM was originated with WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. And the main idea was one view model per screen. So I would refrain from calling it view model. I can call it catalog model, catalog store, something like that. All right? Catalog controller, whatever. And then they all access my store kit. So this can be some sort of a, HTTP client or whatever store kit that you have. But you can think about it, if catalog has 50 screens, inventory has 50 screens, ordering has 50 screens, and shipping has 50, that's like 200. Would you actually create 200 view model for every screen? That's going to be tough. All right. Good luck with that. So what we have done again is reduce every single screen. We were using this approach, and we have now made sure that we are creating one observable object that can give us that particular data that we want. Then I went to core data and Swift data. Don't fight the framework. All right. I mean, Apple has provided you with fetch requests, section fetch requests, query, and all of those different things. These are highly optimized property wrappers and macro. They write a lot of code. They do a lot of things for you. All right. So use this. They also work with tracking, meaning if you add something, it will automatically refresh. Now, you can use query inside the view. You can see over here that I'm using query inside the view. All right. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. You can use that. But if you want to use the same query inside a different view, you can extract it. See that premium at the bottom? Just extract the query out. You can write tests for it if you want to. And you can return all of that stuff. And now you can see that over here I've extracted it out. And if I want to use it, I can use it like that. It's nice and simple. For Swift data, one thing to remember is that your logic, the domain logic, not the presentation logic or validation logic or the transformation logic, the domain logic goes inside the model. You can see the model is called the recipe model, and I have the domain logic called is ingredient valid for course. That's the actual domain logic. That's the rule. That's the business rule. It goes right inside the model. There's no need for creating view model in this case. Actually, I would even say that if you're using Swift data and you use view models, you're going to get into a lot of problems. All right? And then you can write tests for it. Here's another example where I have budget category, and I'm trying to find out if the budget category exists or not. So that's the actual domain rule, and I can put it right inside the model itself. And then I can write a unit test for it. Since we're talking about testing, let's start with testing. What testing is, because everything what has happened over the course of decades and decades is we have put testing on the pedestal, and testing is now right here. Everything else, architecture, we don't really care. That's garbage. Nobody cares about it. If I can test it, it's just better. That's DHH, David Hansen Heinemeier, who the creator of Ruby on Rails. He did a very good talk in 2014, I think. And he's also talking about the same exact thing, that we as developers, we can test it, it's just better. There is no other question. And I think we're getting into this phase where everything has become about testing. And I'm not saying testing is not important. I'm just saying that test the important parts. Here is Ken Beck, the creator of TDD, test-driven development. And he has a very nice code. I get paid for code that works, but not for tests. So my philosophy is to test as little as possible to reach a given level of confidence. Now, obviously, Ken Beck over here is not saying that don't test, but Ken Beck is saying that test the things that actually provide value. You must have some sort of a return on your investment. Here's a very simple code. That's how I write my login view. You can see I have a property called isFormValid. And whenever some people see this, their first thing is that you're not using view model. How are you going to test it? That's the first question they ask, right? They don't care about the simplicity, the beauty, the clarity of this. They're like, well, how do you test it? Well, oh boy, okay, if you want to test it, then you're actually testing the actual property, right? This is the actual property, you're testing it. Nobody is telling you not to write unit tests. You can go ahead and write these unit tests if you want to. All right, that's perfectly fine. Same thing over here. I have in the view, I have filtered products. Now, you can move filtered products into the observable object. That's perfectly fine. But if you're using container presenter pattern, and if you want to, how do you test filtered products? Well, you can write a UI test for it, or you can extract it out into a product filter form and then write tests for it. All right. One thing to note over here is that just because if you're using MVVM or any kind of a model, just because you're testing the model, it does not test your user interface. I have seen people who are trying to recreate the SwiftUI view lifecycle so that they can test it. I'm like, what? How about, I don't know, write a freaking UI test? Jeez. Gotta be kidding me, right? And if you're using those sort environment objects and all that, you can actually test it out. test the behavior, not the implementation details. This also means that if you're writing a test and you're refactoring it and your test is breaking, that means you're not a good test. It's a bad test. Here's an example of when you're actually testing the implementation details. You should test that what the fetch products actually returns, but not when it was called or not. Also, for the mocking, don't use mock for managed dependencies. I've seen so much code where people are just mocking the mocks, and those mocks have its own mocks. And nobody knows what's going on. Why are you mocking things that you own? You should only mock things that you don't own, like payment gateway with one, maybe a currency exchange, because you don't have access to those things. So mocks should be very limited. There's a really great talk by Ian Cooper, and he talks about TDD, where did it go wrong? And he talks about the same things, that we have gone absolutely crazy with everything has to be tested, everything has to be tested. I mean, nobody over here, or maybe there is someone over here who's sending a person to Moon or Mars. But if you are, then yeah, sure, go ahead and write all the tests you can. But most of the time, we are not really sending people to Mars or sending people to the Moon. We're just creating, I don't know, to-do list apps, right? I mean, that's what most of the apps are, right? But no, in all seriousness, I mean, if you're working for a financial application like bank, make sure that you find out where the money is made in the bank. Debit, credit, charging fees, nobody likes that, but it makes money, test that out, all right? You're not gonna get a call in the middle of the night that, oh, you can't believe it, Azam, the color of the button is purple, not pink. Oh, okay, hang up, jeez. All right, test the isolation. Or test is the isolation, not the thing under test. There's another misinformation about testing is, well, I'm writing a test. I need to completely isolate it from the file system, from the database. It shouldn't touch anything. That's completely wrong. Completely wrong, 100% wrong. If your test wants to access the database, go ahead. I mean, if your its own database locally, then go ahead. Do that. Just make sure that when the test is finished, you clean up the database so that the other test is not passing or failing because of the residue that is left behind with the previous test. And for testing, make sure that you're writing end-to-end tests. Those are the best tests, and quite frankly, most of the developers do not write end-to-end tests by saying that, well, it's just too slow, right? Well, of course it's slow. It's doing the work. I can actually write a test that will run in 0 seconds if it doesn't have to do anything. Then make sure that you're writing end-to-end test. From other experimentation, I also looked at navigation in SwiftUI. You can create a very basic navigation for customers. You click on a customer or tap on a customer. You go to the customer details screen. And that's pretty basic. You can use navigation, destination, whatnot. That's fine. How can I do programmatic navigation using enums? Okay, so this is kind of like a programmatic navigation. You can see that in the content view, I have navigation destination, and depending on where you click, I can just add something to the routes, and it's based on the route itself. But then I looked at React. See, there's so much things to learn from React. And I looked at this line number 10, navigate, and I'm like, whoa, this looks really nice. I wonder if I can get my SwiftUI to work like that. Like navigate. Well, you can. I mean, it's just an environment value. So you can work through something and create a navigate environment values. It's not updated for iOS 18. You can use entry macro, I think. But, and then you can use it. You can set it up in some sort of root view, so you don't have to do it again and again. And then here's the usage. On the left side, you can see enum, and that is kind of like a nested enum. So you can even go to patient or doctor, but you can say, I'm going to go to the patient, but list patient. And I want to go to the doctor, but to create a doctor. So over here, navigate, patient, list. So nice, so simple. Right over there, environment, navigate, and it's basically exactly like React. Now, over here, and I'm my own biggest critic. Over here, even though it works, the amount of work that was needed to make it happen, maybe it was not worth it for small or medium-sized app. Maybe if you're working for a very large application, maybe this will make sense. Because over here, I'm like playing around with, I'm kind of like forcing or going against, SwiftUI itself. I'm trying to do things like twisting it in a wrong way. So the current navigate hook method requires extra steps if you want to pass binding, which is a very common operation. So it will not work with binding unless you do something extra. Global sheets. I also wanted to see how we can look at global sheets, meaning how do we display sheets? Well, if you want to display sheets in SwiftUI, you just use the sheet view modifier, as you have seen already over here. Okay, can I display multiple sheets? Yes, you can. I mean, just use multiple sheet modifier. Okay, how about sheets based on enum? Yeah, you can use enums, and now the sheet is based on enums. But what if we can do this? Again, with the environment value, maybe there's an environment value called show sheet, and you can see in the button clicks, I just say show sheet, and it just displays the sheet. Well, you can. So again, you can create an environment value, you can create all of those enums, and then inject it into the environment itself, inject it into your actual application root so that everything is managed in one place. And then you can actually display sheets. Now, since this is a global sheet, there's only one sheet anyways, so this means that you cannot display sheet on top of another sheet. If you use that particular behavior, if you want that particular behavior, then you still can use the normal sheets, all right? What about displaying messages? You know, those toast messages, error, something bad has happened, or success, you have added a new customer. The same technique can be used over there also, all right? Same exact technique. You will create an environment value, and then it will look something like this. So with all of these approaches, you see that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to minimize the work that I need to do. If I want to show a message, then I can just say show message and I'm done. I don't have to do anything other fancy stuff. Now, whenever you're trying to create reusable views, you can either pass in the binding, just like this one reminder cell view, or you can pass in closure. So over here, I'm passing in on checked and on delete. And the reason is that I want the parent to be the person responsible for implementing on checked and on delete because I want to reuse that. For this example, it's fine. I mean, there's only two closures, on checked and on delete. But if I go to 3 or 4 or 5, then it becomes messy, both on this side and on the calling side. So what we can do is, how about we take those and put it into the reminder cell events, like an enum. And then the reminder cell view can just have the enum, and then it can just use that. So this makes it a little bit simpler for the caller to call this and for the consumer to consume this. And here's the calling side. You can see reminder cell view. Now we are switching the event on checked, on delete, a little bit more cleaner because we're not passing like 30 different closures or 5 different closures. And finally, formatting. All right. Now there are so many different variations that Apple has provided to you. This is just for date formatting, and you can see there's so many different variations that you can use right inside the view. And all of these will work with the locale. So whatever locale that you're using, it's automatically going to pick up that locale, and it's automatically going to work. So try to use, whenever you're trying to format something, especially dates. This also goes for list formatting. So you can use list formatting also, like John, Mary, and you can separate them with and or and all those things. So all of these things are available to you. And finally, one last thing. In 2022, when I was learning these things, I started publishing a lot of articles. All right? Maybe you have read some of these articles. And every article was built, and it was improving, hopefully, right? So I was building, I was writing these articles. These were long articles that I was publishing. And I wrote a lot of articles. I created a lot of videos, a lot of YouTube stuff. Especially this article, Building Large Application with SwiftUI, a Guide to Modular Architecture. It's a pretty long article. You can read it on azamsharp.com. And what happened was 2022, right? So it was like 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, probably. What happens is that a lot of people have invested time in learning things in a certain way, whether they're using MVVM, whether they're using blah, 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 Redux and all that stuff. And they didn't like what I posted, all right? So iOS community went crazy. I was receiving direct messages from people I don't even know, like, take down these articles, you're ruining the community, you're ruining everything, take it down. Our junior developers are reading this, oh my God, all right? But I didn't, I mean, it's still there, so I got a thick skin. All right, so a lot of people were saying like some weird stuff, right? I mean, they were on Reddit, which is usually a very nice place to hang out. Yeah, so a lot of video, a lot of things were going on. So I didn't really do much. I mean, I just created more content and more stuff and more courses. I just like, you know what? I'm patient. I'm just going to wait. So now we're in 2024, probably a little bit over 2 years. And what I see happening now is people are experimenting. People are writing their own articles. This is not me, obviously, but people are looking at different ways of building apps. All right? Whether they are using whatever I discuss, whether they're using their own techniques, I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested, wow, they are actually experimenting. They are out of their comfort zone and at least trying out things, you know? I think it all started with this post. Anybody seen this post on SwiftUI forums on Apple? This was the actual post, right? If you read the comments to this post, they are horrible. What are people doing? That's not how to behave, right? So I read this post in 2022 or something, and instead of writing like you suck or something like that, I actually contacted the guy who wrote the post. It's not me, by the way, all right? I contacted the guy who wrote the post, and I'm like, I'm interested. I'm heavily invested in MVVM. Let's talk. Let's just talk. So we had a Zoom meeting, and he talked, and we talked, discussed ideas. I agreed with some things, and I didn't agree with other things. But that was a nice discussion, a way to discuss these things, all right? And now I'm seeing a lot of people are experimenting. It works for their apps. I mean, I'm not saying that these techniques should work for every single app, but it works. And I'm happy to see this because they're experimenting. All right? So what was the whole idea? The whole idea was just to spark a discussion, right? I mean, this is why you all are here. This is why I'm here. I'm sure I have much to learn from you. Right? So if you don't follow any of these patterns, if you don't follow any of the principles, any of the design pattern, architecture choices, just follow one. Be kind. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.